welcome to this NDTV special. Every year, the World Economic Forum chooses from countries across the world what it calls young global leaders. Of course, the premise of the recognition, as well as the Economic Forum itself, is the premise of globalization. But after the recession that the world, especially the West, has seen in the last couple of years, what kind of emotions does this word globalization evoke now? Especially in India, as the Congress is sometimes seen to be returning to a left-of-center heart, if not a brain. Is globalization now a bad word? Let me start with Sachin Pilot, who has been a young global leader, is one of our young and prominent politicians, minister in the government as well. Sachin, it's often argued that politicians are wary of globalization because they're the ones who have to go out, contest elections, especially in a country like ours, where the word globalization seems to conjure up images of the West as enemy. Do you feel that globalization is a very loaded word in a country like India?
Not at all. I think it depends on in what context you want to use that word. In terms of policy making, in terms of people being aware with the proliferation in internet, mobile telephones, television, the media, I think people are becoming very aware as to what's out there. And I think as a young country, it's good for people to have the information of the choices, of the resources, of the opportunities that are there. India's pivotal role in South Asia, in global affairs, is becoming more and more prominent precisely because we've adapted ourselves. We've become flexible enough to absorb the good things that are coming out of globalization, whether it's trade, whether it's issues are becoming global. But now it's whether it's climate change, whether it's proliferation, whether it's economy, it's all global. And unless you're adapting yourself accordingly, you will not be in the race.
You're a telecom minister. Do you see the mobile phone, in a sense, as that great symbol of globalization? Though I read an interesting report earlier this week which said that there were more mobile phones in India than there were toilets. Now, when you hear a juxtaposition like that, does it sort of disturb you somewhere?
It does. And I think we must not get carried away by the achievements that we have had so far, because we have to look at the broader context into what this country represents. It's not just people who have mobile phones, it's not just the metropolitan cities, it's also a huge chunk of our population, which in the earlier comments you were calling the government left of center and so on and so forth. But please remember, a large section of our country needs the support of the government at whatever the cost. So you have to be able to balance the new innovations, new policy, the opening up of the global economy, India looking outwards globally. At the same time, millions of people who don't have 2 square meals to eat or sanitation, like you pointed out, those people need protection. So the government has to be candid enough, to be open enough about saying, here are 2 things we need to cater, and we have to balance it out. And that's where the job of the government comes into a very important role.
Well, let me then, on that note, go to Montek Singh Ahluwalia. As the person heading the Planning Commission, but somebody who's made no bones about your own sort of brand of economic philosophy, if I may use that phrase, it's interesting to hear Sachin use the word globalization and protection in the same sentence, because the conventional definition of globalization maybe 5 years ago was that you wanted to do away with protection and big states to the extent that you could. But can that ever happen in a country like India? You're, for example, at the center of this big debate around the food security bill, and it all rests on identifying the number of poor people in India correctly.
I don't think there's any contradiction in any of that and what Sachin has said. The central theme, which underlies the 11th plan and will continue to do so.
Tuba.com